I'm just going to hand it over to her.
Well, thank you, Kathleen, and Happy New Year to all of you. It's good to be with you. I was saying, just as we were gathering, it seemed like all of a sudden we just came out of the gate with the new year and gathering again around Zoom. But it's good to be with you. I'm looking forward to this conversation. The one thing I want to say, though, as we get into this whole concept of sustainability is we are literally scratching the surface of what it means to sustain a program. So when I looked at what to offer you today, I wanted to make sure that we get the important concepts out, but there's a lot to sustainability, planning. It loops back to your evaluation work. But I want to go through three things today. First of all, I want to review some basic concepts, some of the things we talked about the last time. Secondly, I want to hear how you did on the instrument, the tool that we offered you. We are not grading it. We're not collecting it. We just simply want to know, what did you gain from that? What did you learn about your program or the congregations you're working with? And then thirdly, what do you do with the results of a tool? So I want to show you some examples of some action planning, how you might go about doing that. And then the fourth thing I would offer after today is my availability to help you go deeper with sustainability, answer your questions, look at some of the things that you're thinking about, or just have a conversation. So just know that that's always there for you. That's why I'm here, and I would welcome that. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen, Jesse, with my PowerPoint, just to go through some concepts, some slides. And we're going to start from here. There we go. So today we're going to not be talking so much about evaluation, although we will periodically, but more about sustainability and how to create strategies for the long-term sustainability of your program. But as I also understand it, the congregation's program, what can you offer them to help them think about sustainability, given that they're at a different level or a different mindset about sustainability? I would offer you this, that program sustainability can mean different things depending on the development stage of a program. That's really important to remember. For example, newer programs, and all of you were newer programs in the beginning, and so were the congregations. Most of the kind of sustainability issues revolved around the activities or the infrastructure. What's working, what's not working in the program? What do we keep, not keep in terms of activities? And then also the infrastructure dealt with the staffing, the funding, the office, if you will, the technology that you needed to run a program. All of those were the kinds of things that dealt with infrastructure. But newer programs should be more concerned about either activities or infrastructure, obviously before the funding runs out. And I think I said the last time we were together, I'm always struck by the fact that we start talking about sustainability in year 2.5 and 3, when in reality, we should be talking about it right as you begin your program. For more experienced programs, however, a program that is proven, we're looking at how to perhaps enlarge target audiences or populations. Let's say a congregations program really has value and benefit for more than just the people it's serving. So how do they go out and offer this program to a wider group of people, whether it's in their denomination, in their community, or whatever that might be? A second thing might be how to transfer best practices to other programs. Probably a good example might be the use of theological reflection, for example. It worked in this program. Maybe other programs or services within the context of a congregation would benefit by really well done theological reflection. And then thirdly, how to build relationships with others. And I know that was an important part of the sustainability tool. A program cannot be an island to itself. It really has to garner support and conversation with a wide variety of audiences and partners. So that becomes really very important. But for experience programs, there is an assumption that there is a stable funding base, but they're more concerned about how do they take the success of the program and make it known to a wider group of audiences and use some of the elements of that good program in other programs. And I would think, knowing what I know about this initiative, there are many elements of a congregations program that would benefit other groups as well, especially in the congregation. Please stop me at any time if you have questions, and I'll have Jesse monitor that for me, okay? Planning for sustainability begins long before the funding runs out. We've talked about that. We'll talk about that today as well. And then the last time we met, when we tried to define sustainability, we talked about the various factors that contribute to good sustainability. First and foremost is planning and evaluation. Your grant proposals are a good example of planning. You submitted to Lilly Endowment a plan for something that you believed would work. And then within the grant proposal, you also had, at least I hope you did, a section on how you were going to evaluate. Funding, initially you had funding from Lilly Endowment, but for congregations in particular, if their program is working, one of the things we want to know is how are they going to sustain the funding? What other kinds of strategies can they employ? Solid program design, partners or partnerships, personnel, and stable personnel. Kathleen can probably relate to this when she was in my role, but one of the first things that happened in year 1 and 2 of many grants is that there was a lot of turnover. Project directors would leave, so there was a lot of instability in the infrastructure and in the staffing of the programs. A community that is supportive, a host agency, and in this context, we're also talking about the congregation as the host agency, or in some cases, a diocese or a denomination can be a host agency. And then really good communications, and we'll talk about that later. And in fact, in an action plan, I'll show you how communications in a sustainability plan can be worked out. But these are the concepts, the factors that we talked about the last time we were together late last year. We talked about the host organization, and one of the things that contributes to really good sustainability of a program is a strong organization. And in particular, it has these factors. It has strong leadership, leadership that is supportive, encouraging, and visionary. It has good community engagement in that people are engaged both in the program and within the organization. The organization and the programs that it runs are relevant to the mission, relevant to the vision of where it hopes to go in the future. A really strong organization is able to adapt and is agile in how it goes about adapting programs, especially in the world that we're in today, when context in particular is changing rapidly. And for most of us, one of the things that all of us faced in terms of adaptability was the use of Zoom rather than the use of in-person meetings. And how you adapt programs to that kind of format and still make it a meaningful experience is really a very important consideration here. The organization is efficient and effective in how it goes about using its resources. There's not a lot of waste. It has a robust infrastructure, meaning within the program and beyond the program, there is an infrastructure that is supportive of making this program work. And then certainly, lastly, financial health. that there is a stable funding base of the organization that contributes to the funding of the program. But for your purposes, in the context of a congregation, we would also be looking at these kinds of characteristics. Does the congregation have some of these particular kinds of characteristics in order to sustain that program down the road? So the last time we left, I gave you the opportunity to assess your capacity for sustainability by using one example of a sustainability tool. It was a bit of a quiz, if you will, where you could assess and then score yourselves. Were all of you able to do that? I can't see all the faces, so I'm assuming yes or no.
You're getting lots of nods, Sue.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Okay, so you get an A+. So we're going to go through it one by one, and I'd like to hear from you rather than from me how you did on each of these. I mean, if you don't feel like you want to offer anything, but where did you feel your strong points were, and where might there be some work that needs to be done? So let's start with external support, community, having a supportive internal and external climate for your program. How did you do?
Before we start, can I just say sorry, this is Joy, because I
Yes,
don't know
Joy.
who you can see. This
Yeah.
was really wonderful, and I appreciate it because ABC is itself going through this is like a year where we're actually about to go, we're preparing for a strategic plan next year. So the whole institution is doing planning and sustainability work. But this was cool. Some of our scores were not great. And I was like, but the important thing is we know where we are. And
That's right.
so this was I was like, it's not pretty, but we know where we are. And that's the most important thing. So I just wanted to say up front, thank you. It was super helpful to be able to have a conversation around it rather than folks just guessing about random stuff in terms of measures. So.
All right. And then in fact, Jessie emailed me at one point, I think it was late last year, when she sent the instrument out and said, should they fill it out individually? And I encouraged you to fill it out as a team. So you have those conversations, and they really are learning conversations. What are we learning about ourselves in terms of trying to sustain a program? And then where is the work that needs to be done? So there's no right or wrong answers. There's no grading of this. It really is to help you engage in meaningful conversations that in the end will support and benefit the program. So how did you do on external support? Is that a strong point for some of you or a place that needs work?
What do you consider strong?
I'm sorry, Joy, say that again.
I said, what do you consider strong? We averaged a 5.25, but I don't know what you consider strong, so.
Well, first of all, do you have a wider circle of stakeholders or believers in the program?
Yeah, so sorry, we averaged a 5.25 on the scale. So it was like, I feel like that was decent, but there's a question of what you consider strong, since we don't really have a frame of reference for what you as a professional would consider strong. So, well,
the scoring is just to give you a gauge. I don't want to lean on that too heavily, but let's say you scored in the 2s or 3s. I'd say, why is that so? The question becomes what's lacking here in terms of gaining external support. So I would say, Joy, from your perspective, it sounds like you are doing some work externally in gaining a wider audience. How about the rest of you? Any comments?
I'll chime in. First of all, Lisa actually offered a question in the chat. Is it possible to stop the screen to see us as we talk? Not that I want to see a larger picture of my face, but we'll just take it from there. I think for me, and I'm going to use Janae's words as we were filling it out, are that it was a sobering experience. And particularly, as we were thinking about and doing the answers to the questions, we're thinking like, how do we communicate this? to other folks in the organization? How do we communicate this to trustees? And the mere fact that we were having to continually sort of process how that information will be shared was a considerable part of how we also answered the questions too. Because, and then on the other hand, you know, we're thinking, well, from an organizational perspective, if you say the wrong thing, then all of a sudden there's emotions and there's thoughts that sort of all wrapped up around that. And then on the flip side, we're thinking, and I mentioned this to Janae, but I've got to go back and then talk to the folks at Lilly and be able to justify from that. So it's this sort of interesting scenario where you're between a rock and a hard place, or really you're between the truth and a looking good place as you're trying to go through and fill it out. So that being said, we came in, our domain total was 17 and our average score was 4.25 for this particular section. And so, and it wasn't the lowest that we had, but it did actually acknowledge, you know, sort of cause us to think and process. You know, we've got some really great folks on the inside who are lifting this work up, but when it comes to how we are being engaged externally, then that's where a lot of the question comes into play.
Good. And I would say, from the most part, really lean on the positive rather than the negative scoring. Where can you leverage some of the positive scoring? Where can you leverage it and increase it or make it work in other areas as well? And we started with external support because these champions, as they're called, are the ones that are going to help widen the base of support. It's that whole notion of you tell two people and they'll tell two people and so on and so on. That promotion, that self-promotion. We find out about many good things in this world, especially programs or good books, by talking to somebody else. And those kinds of recommendations are really essential. And the more you can get out the good news about what your program is doing or what your congregations are doing, that's how you're going to promote yourselves. There are some formal things you can do, and we'll talk about that later, but it really is the word of mouth and the experience that participants have as well.
And I'll make comment, adding to what Saeed was saying as we went through it, that it was very helpful in giving a broad-based view of a lot of specifics of what needs to be considered. So often we're working in compartmentalized ways, and you don't really think about all of those minute details of what it takes for sustainability as well as evaluation. So the assessment tool was very helpful in that way. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Definitely something to go back to and look at as we are going forward, as we continue to build and grow for that purpose.
Perfect. Good.
Sue, this is Jane. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry. This was, I thought, one of the most important areas for us, but it raised some things I hadn't thought about so much. But I'm not, the role that we play in relation to Collegeville Institute is that work on vocation is really important for the Institute in a lot of ways. But I think what it helped me see was we have a role to play in the sustainability of this larger thing. Like our ability to communicate well with the board and with the whole constituency of Collegeville Institute. It's enlivening for the bigger project. It's not just about sustaining this thing, but it's really about sustaining the entity that we're part of, and we're part of their mission. And so helping to get the word out about that.
Yeah, what you just said, Jane, that you're part of the mission. You contribute. You're part of the engine that contributes to a strong mission and a strong vision. And I appreciate the fact that you see it in the larger context, because that sustains the organizational structure as well. Okay, I'm going to move on then. How about funding stability? I know this is your favorite one. How did you do here?
I can
Quiet.
jump. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, it sort of picks up on the one before. I like the others, like Joy and all of them were saying, I think the exercise of going through this, sort of the intervention of stopping and looking at these questions was really helpful. And as we were assessing, I think we talked ourselves from being sort of very self-critical up the scale in many cases, because we realized, no, actually we are beginning to do these things, or we have been noticed despite ourselves, or we're being asked to do more. Just, you know, there are these indicators of outside of value in what we're doing in our immediate institution and beyond. But when it came to the financial, I think it's where we are at this very moment, you know, the kind of moment in time. No, we don't have financial sustainability past the 5-year grant per se, but we have a lot of allies that are supporting the work. There's a lot of kind of parallel play going on in the Episcopal tradition. So I'm very confident that there are resources there, as well as our own institution, our seminary institution, that it felt like an optimistic sort of moment. But if we weren't attentive to it, it would be easy to not be sustainable, if that makes sense. So it felt like we're sort of, we've reached the, you know, we've climbed the mountain and we're about to put the flag down, and we could fall over the other edge, or we could be intentional about how we begin to build out from there. So that's not a very good metaphor, but the idea is that I think it was just the right moment to ask the questions. So in some cases, I think we feel like there's absolutely stable financial support because of the grant and because of the collaboration from our host institution and our faith communities. But the next step about what do we discern God is calling us to sustain programmatically that will require funding, we need to go there next. So
Right. And many of you are moving into being an experienced program. And that gives you the opportunity to say there may be some things in our program that need to fall away. And we concentrate on only 1 or 2 good things. And that certainly impacts the funding as well, in terms of how much financial resources you need to do it. But to assume that a program will always look the same over a long period of time is not really a very good assumption. You really want to take the best of what you're doing, or break it up into smaller parts, perhaps, or join it up with another program. I mean, there's a variety of ways to get around the funding. Certainly garnering other kinds of funding streams is important. Everything from fees to individual donors to other grants. Those are certainly important considerations, but also how you structure the program in a different way so that funding is not so heavy for you. That makes sense to everybody? Any other comments on the funding part? How did you do on that?
We did well enough to recognize that we need to do more work.
Oh, more work.
Yes,
Okay.
indeed. It's one of those areas, again, where you're so engaged in doing the work. And when you have a small staff who does a lot of different things simultaneously, it requires a lot more intentionality to make it happen. So that was definitely one of the recognitions we came to.
Right. And keep a strong community around you. You cannot do this alone. You have to be in conversation with a larger body of people, whether it's your team and your team and others. That's what, keep the conversation moving beyond just yourselves. Okay, let's move on then to the next one, which was partnerships, having a shared purpose. I'm curious to see how you did on this one. Or here, I should say.
Laura, go ahead.
I think in this area, it's more about potential because COVID kind of interrupted the partnerships that we were forming. And we're moving from a national profile to a more localized profile, theoretically. because that's still in flux. But I think that we built on partnerships, and we did that well at the beginning of the COVID crisis when we gave out our mini grants, and also supported our congregations in their building their partnerships. But there certainly is more to do in terms of coordinating with community leaders and getting them involved in the program.
That's a good point, Laura. I mean, looking locally rather than more globally is a really good strategy to start with. But
Yeah,
that's kind of strategy.
I was just going to say this was an interesting one for us as a national hub, that one of our kind of primary goals is to draw on the gifts in the room. Like that's one of our strategies going forward. And so we haven't brought in as many like outside speakers for our gatherings, or we've really tried to invite the core team members that are working with this program to do a lot of that work. And so yeah, this partnership section made me think about kind of what's the right balance, and when does it make sense for someone with a particular kind of expertise or background to come in, and then when else is it really good to just draw on the gifts that we have in the group.
And, you know, program participants in particular might be a resource for finding partners in the community. They may know someone. So even the audience that you're directly servicing may very well indeed be a resource for you and how to grow partnerships or relationships, or at least open the door for you. In partnerships and funding, you need to think like a development professional in many respects. How do you cultivate those relationships in a way that are meaningful for you and meaningful for them? It's a mutual benefit. And what will a partner gain by helping you and you helping them in some way?
I think from the coordination perspective, this is really an interesting question across the hubs because of the different kinds of strategies you chose to go after and where you as an organization already had partnerships. So I'm just looking at a couple faces right away, like Lisa, you know, so VTS's whole program was to go after this network of Episcopal dioceses and churches that were related to the seminary, not related to the seminary, you know, but the partnership was built around this larger ecclesial body. Okay, or like what Jane or Jesse was saying about the Collegial Institute. We didn't have that. We don't have that strategy. You know, we go after our mission and ecumenical national scope, because if we had a local program like Laura wants, we would end up with, you know, 12 Lutheran congregations. So it's nothing wrong with Lutheran congregations, don't get me wrong, but you can see, or like Rhonda at Regent, you know, again, they had these partnerships, you know, if your organization like Baylor or like Samford, like Regent already had I'm just going to call it like a church relations office, you know, this entity in the organization that was reaching out to congregations. Whitworth, they're not here, but they would be an excellent example. Then the grant project itself was building on already existing partnerships or partnerships the grantee wanted to get. So that's interesting, just the comparison of across how partnerships worked here. But then the other one is, which I think we could have a much longer conversation about, is how congregations have partnerships and whether the sustainability of whatever they're doing is built on partners outside their congregation, whether that's like with the diocese. Again, I think of VTS's example of that church in Alabama, the video you shared with us of that little church that taught the diocese something. That was a great example. Or Whitworth, again, you know, all these congregations working with social justice ministries in their communities. So that's another layer of this.
Yeah. And Jane, go ahead.
I don't want to interrupt, but I was just going to sort of build on that to say, as I look at a lot of these things, I've said to our congregations a lot of times, it's not really about the grant money that we're giving you. Like that $10,000 is really about the relationships that you are cultivating with the people around you. And I think a lot of them can actually very well sustain this afterwards, because it hasn't been about the money. The money was nice. It helped them gather people together and pay for that. But really it was about solidifying some really important relationships.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about partners and relationships is that they can really spawn new programs because of the conversations that take place, or you see an element or best practice in a program that you're doing already, and you spawn that off to something completely new that others would benefit from. I mean, the one thing I love about coordination programs like this is that everyone in this room, and obviously not everyone is here today, but you learn from each other, and that makes your programs even better. And you take that, it's a mutual exchange of good information, which makes your programs better, and perhaps gives you new ideas for newer programs or better programs. I want to check the chat. Good. So let's move on to the next one, which is organizational capacity. Stability and leadership and staffing. Sometimes this is a challenge, other times it's not so much a challenge, but let's just pause there for a moment and see how you did there.
We have had remarkable consistency in the 3 years of across the 13 projects. It's really amazing.
That's
the
great.
only project director we've lost is our project. But we, we had Jane who very capably picked that up for us. So, but Sue, you had said at the beginning that I've seen a lot of grant projects where there's just a revolving door. There's just not enough stability in the program because there's not a project director or team that kind of stays in place. And it's really incredible how stable these projects have been.
Good, good. And in your planning work later on, we're going to talk about a sustainability plan. Succession planning becomes very important. Mentoring becomes very important. Grooming new people to come into the program as interns even is very important. That's how you stabilize, the staffing issue within a program. People move on, and you expect that. They grow and they change, and they have other paths that they want to take. But we also want to make sure that the program is stable by having strong leadership. Okay. Then we go on to strategic planning and evaluation, my favorite stuff. I'm assuming everyone got very strong scores here on evaluation. How'd you do here? And here I combine strategic planning with evaluation because your evaluation informs the direction you need to go. You ask yourself, what are we learning from our evaluation work? What is the data saying to us? What are interviews saying to us, the qualitative data? What are writings that we receive from participants saying to us? That leads to program improvement, program sustainability, but then you incorporate that in your good strategic plan, your goals.
This is Christina from Regent.
Yes.
I think this is one area where I feel like we've done a lot, and we've tried to build in evaluation from the very beginning, and we have pivoted. I mean, I think we've all pivoted, but we've really tried to take the feedback from our churches and shape and reshape. So, our first cohort and our second cohort in some ways look quite different because we've pivoted based on sort of these micro feedback that we receive. I think one of the things I found encouraging about working on the tool was realizing that while we've done that very well in terms of the activities of our program now, we still need to take the time to discuss how we translate that into strategic planning for the long term.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And one way to do that, Christina and others, is to look at what you're learning from your evaluation work and then just stand back from it and say, what's really urgent that we need to address? Kind of prioritize what's urgent. What's nice to do? I mean, on a scale of urgent to nice to do, what are the urgent or essential things that are going to keep the program at its very best? And work on those kinds of things. And strategically, they might fold into some goals for yourself. Other things might be nice to do, but they're not worth your time. And you can put them to the side until they become a little more urgent. But look at your evaluation data and what is it saying? And we've learned a lot, all of us, in the last year, myself included as a facilitator and an evaluation consultant, in terms of how to work with Zoom with groups when you're not in the room with them and you can't connect physically. We're always learning about that. So how does that translate into how you operate a program or deliver a program online for the most part? And from what I know and what I think all of us know, we're going to be in this environment at least to the end of the year for the most part. So your evaluation work is continuous. I mean, you can do an evaluation, but you're going to do it again and again and again. Then the next area, which really flows from evaluation, is program design and adaptation. Really adapting your program to what you're learning from your evaluation. As I said earlier, looking at what stays and what needs to perhaps fall away, taking the best of what's going on in your program and leveraging that to make it an even better program. And in some cases, as we've just discussed with COVID, adapting the program to new ways of delivering it, perhaps. So responding to a clear need. And many of the things I think Jessica and all of you can relate to is all the initiatives that are part of Lilly Endowment had to adapt in this last year very quickly. And everyone admitted, and everyone was very patient with the fact that we're all learning how to go about this together. And people were really gracious about taking in Zoom and learning from it, and but still getting the benefit of a program in some way. Any comments or questions in this area?
I wonder how much we're thinking about how 21 is going to be different than 20. And this is what I mean. I know we all think it's going to be better. But something that happened to us in 20 was that COVID slowed us way down. We all are going to report that, we just did less, we spent less money or whatever. Congregations had to slow down, our programming had to slow down. But I wonder what it's going to be like to restart a lot of these things. Are we going to shoot out of a cannon, like on a high-speed train? Or are we going to take what we learned about being slow or slower and integrate that going forward? I don't know. Has anybody thought about if you can have people together this year, or when you can have people together this year, what's that going to be like?
Yeah, Kathleen, we're kind of going back and forth on that because we're, ready to be done with our people, and we're not sure that the time we were supposed to be done now the third time, that we pushed it back, that we're even going to get that in still to kind of celebrate together. I want to say though that I've kind of landed in a slightly different place with what we've learned from the last year, and what might be different is what has become really, really important to us are the ideas and the theological traction in this theme of calling and vocation that has really bubbled to the top as powerful in a time like this. And that has almost become more important to us, that is the sustainability thing rather than the programs, rather than the ways we worked specifically with the churches. So like, what have we learned about how people have absorbed and lived this way of understanding their lives and their faith through the lens of calling? And then how do we help that become the thing that we take into the future, rather than like, we kind of have already tried to mimic what we did with our 24 churches with a church that paid us, like, and we're going to come alongside you and do with you now what we did with them. And it's going okay. Like, it's not as though it's terrible, but I just don't know if that's the future that we want to invest in anymore. It feels like there's another thing at the end of the process. And yeah, so I mean, it's a both and, but.
Laura?
And to piggyback on what Nancy said, I think that as well as slowing us down and making us pause and reevaluating everything, last year helped us reprioritize and also immediately cut out anything that was going to be burdensome to the congregations, because it was too much to ask at the moment. So going forward, the things that we might have asked them to do but didn't, now seems like busy work to me as the person that's going to create this revised program. And so the hard part is to try to decide what part of that is not busy work and really important, and what part of that is we can let go.
Yeah.
And put more resources into things that are more productive at this moment, which is sort of counter sustainability in a sense, because we have to look at the now, and we're not looking at the future in the, I don't know, I almost want to say existential sense. I mean, yeah, we could try to plan for the next 12 months, but the last 12 months has told us that we have no idea what the next 12 months is going to look like. So anyway, I don't know if that's helpful to anybody, but it's where I think that we are. And this was our strongest, incidentally, our strongest section was at adaptability. I think that we do that really well.
Well, just imagine for a moment, if you will, that everything goes away. It's not, but everything goes away tomorrow, and this group gathers in a room for the first time. Are you just going to leap into your program? It's a profound moment for people to be in a room together without fear of a disease or a virus, I should say, that will affect them in some way. And so really taking advantage of those moments and incorporating that kind of thing, especially in the kinds of programs that you're doing, where there's so much theological and spirituality incorporated into them, that I would leverage in some way, rather than leaping into the nuts and bolts of your program. And like Laura said, some things will no longer be relevant. They'll feel like busy work.
Yeah, I think it will require a lot of processing.
Yes.
Of what happened and how people impacted. When you think about it, we really are in a deaf culture.
and what that has meant existentially for people and facing our own mortality and so many other things, the many loss of rituals that are no longer to be played out, particularly within church settings, and of deaths and funerals and homegoings and being at loved ones' bedside or at home. I mean, the accumulation of grief, I think, is so heavy that alone must be addressed and accounted for to be able to move forward in any healthy way.
Yeah, people will need to process that, and
a lot of process.
Program directors can certainly help facilitate that.
Yeah, because all of us have been impacted. I mean, there are no exceptions, whether we're conscious of it or not. We've all been impacted by this.
Yeah, for sure.
But in some ways, this should be a sweet spot for us, right? It's, I mean, the very questions about calling and meaning and purpose, that's what we're supposed to be encouraging the congregation. So, you know, whether it's, you know, the Cubs lose the World Series or a pandemic, we're that was supposed to be funny.
Funny.
You know, we're inviting people to Sue, you had mentioned before, to do this kind of theological reflection. However, we've invited people to learn those skills or to do that. So it feels to me like, Janae, like you're saying, we just need to turn the focus of this program to whatever presents itself. And this is what's presented to us, this great loss. And what a time for the church to step forward and really give witness to what we know how to do. We know how to bury the dead, honor the saints, you know, accompany people who grieve. So we should show up good.
Yeah.
Our programs, but also the church should step forward, I hope. Anyway,
and I think
I'm preaching.
And that, yeah, I also believe in that sharing, that we will hear a lot of divine paradoxes that will come forth as well. Right. Evidence of God's presence and the deepening, the spiritual deepening that has taken place over the course of this time, and becoming slowed and having to do church differently and view church differently, etc. Yeah.
And in essence, as you talk about it from a theological perspective, it is a program adapting to the environment that you're in, adapting to what is the need of the people you're serving at that moment.
Well, it's for me, it's hugely, sorry, so I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just got excited. It just feels so much like freedom to be faithful to who we're called to be, as opposed to wedded to buildings and all of the things that many of you have already articulated that we've had to let go of, that became less essential. And then related to that is the grief that's associated with those practices and those spaces and so forth. So it's not a simple thing to say, oh, jettison your building and just be the beloved community. But there's something we've learned in this project together, I think, about what holds us together and what is of God, and where the church of whatever tradition is freed up to follow the way of Jesus, as opposed to being sort of burdened by institutional demands and expectations. And there's some hope for me in that this year. I don't think it'll be easy, but I feel like this project we have a gift to walk alongside, to bring alongside all of the anxieties of our institutional churches, trying to figure out what reentry, what beginning again looks like, and to be in those conversations quietly and gently but confidently about what we've been hearing, because it's everything you're all saying, but I go like this with the emotion of it. But I feel I draw into that, like there's something so good and holy about the direction God is inviting us, I think.
Yeah, it's that deep listening that really helps you in terms of where you want to take this. And it may take you into a new place that is even better than what you originally had envisioned.
I would like to, offer into this. Kathleen kind of laughed at us back in September because I sent her our program schedule, and she said, so you're doing more than what you did before, but here was why. So please remembering our programs, a lot of them haven't granted yet, so they hadn't started their projects. So we like in that way, I think a lot of y'all folks like had started their projects or were in process, whereas our congregations were like, wow, this is exactly why we need this. And we basically were continuing in our learning process with them, which is why we were able, so just completely different circumstances programmatically. But before we started for the year, we literally spent the summer just doing check-ins and conversations with them to see how they were doing and where they were doing, and actually ended up having a brainstorming session. So everybody was invited. I think like 5 of our 17 congregations ended up participating, but it was that everyone was invited. So it was first this awareness. We really want the input and feedback of everyone who's willing and able to participate. And then 2, they basically told us this is what we need the next year to look like. So we didn't guess. We had to maintain contact with them anyway. So it was literally a couple months of check-ins, just how y'all doing, what's going on, how can we and the other congregations be in prayer with and for you. And then the brainstorming session, we literally said, we don't want to tell you what the next year needs to look like. We actually need you to tell us. And it was also framed as an opportunity for them to see each other, because otherwise they love getting together. So they literally made their calendar for this. So we had more stuff, but it was the stuff they told us they needed. So I want to offer that for folks who are like, we don't know what to do. Don't make it a guessing game. Just it's what we're telling them to do. Ask your community what they need. But we always frame everything as this is a conversation. This is us co-creating together, rather than, hey, you guys, we need to replan the thing. We need to tell you, it's a conversation we really like to gather. And the purpose of this gathering is just to frame what is our meaningful next step forward. And it ended up being our summer institute instead of it was supposed to be this out in the community playing with different organizations in the city. And it for real ended up being like 5 days of grieving and processing rituals and like what happened with certain congregations, how they had pivoted since, and it was just like a catching up and a grieving and release space for them in that way. So I just want to offer that. I'm going to stop because I think I just talked for like 3.5 minutes. If anybody would like to talk more about it, you can email me or reach out. And it's just to say, we looked at it as the opportunity to like walk with them, as to like partner with them more, rather than, oh, we have to figure out what to do next. So
thank you, Joy, for that offering.
I think that's just such a really fascinating story, because it goes to Laura's point about adaptability. I think, Joy, you were just really able to adapt there, partly because of where your program was at too. But so I think, we experienced this slowing down, but Joy's story is kind of an example of Heifetz's notion of like when to turn the heat up a little bit, like when to get people's attention, when to get them working on something again, when to get them back kind of on track. And I think we found this across the hubs and also with the hub teams. Like people needed some structured, if you teach too, I think you might have found this with class, people needed some structured like tasks to do during this. And that really helped. And so I think the way that you convene those churches and like you gave them just enough. And your story also to me is about giving them the agency to do it, not just like telling them what to do or like super didactic, do this, but creating this space that they could not think about 20 steps that they have to do, but like you said, like that next step. Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. So you all see, you're already doing a lot of this without even having to take this tool. So For that, I give you an A+. I'm going to share my screen in the interest of time and just show you what you do with the results of this. You don't have to follow it this way, and I can make this available if you want it. I can send it to Jesse. But to develop an action plan and using communications, which was one of the last areas, depending on how you scored it, this is an example of a communications plan. I'm gonna make it a little bit larger because it looks kind of small. Can everyone see that? Can't get it to, there we go. Areas communications from your assessment of yourselves under communication, it might be you need to develop a strategic communications with your stakeholders and your publics about your program's efforts and successes. And the way to start is to start small with your team. This is just a sample of what one group did. They identified 3 key success areas of their program, things that were really going well. And in order to do that, they reviewed their program data, they discussed it with staff and others. Then secondly, they conduct a literature review to provide further support and context for our success. Where is this working in other contexts? So that we can tag on to that to say, we did it, and it certainly is demonstrated and shown to be helpful in other areas as well. So a staff member could be assigned to do some kind of literature review or research review. And then thirdly, they scheduled presentations with 2 to 3 organizations in order to promote their good works. And they developed a presentation and supporting information that could be distributed perhaps. And then they conducted those presentations. But in conducting those presentations with other organizations, they also did a quick evaluation survey to learn how people felt about what they learned from them. But this is an example of an action plan and how you might take the findings of your sustainability tool scoring and begin to develop it into either a strategic plan or an action plan. Another area might be partnerships. How do you cultivate relationships with potential program partners, as this group did? And they just broke it down into simple steps. We need to identify potential partners. Who are they? So this really became a brainstorming session and also a research project where they went on websites to see what organizations or denominations or other institutes perhaps who might be interested in the program. They developed profiles of those potential partners, and then they developed a tailored ask and talking points in terms of how they would want to approach a potential partner. But this is again another example of an action plan in terms of steps that they want to achieve, who will do the work, someone has to do it. What will success look like? And these are really concrete measures to ensure that you get something in the end from your action steps. And then perhaps non-financial resources, and then a timeline. And I'm happy to send this to you as a template. These are just samples of what groups have done. But to take each of these elements in the sustainability tool and as you see fit, as you see a need, to develop them into a really concrete action plan that you can work out of.
I have a request.
Go ahead.
Could you send the blank one? And is it possible for us to get that one too? Because I was like, there's some great stuff in there that I would like to not make from scratch. If
Sure, you can copy.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll send you a blank template, and then we'll send you these samples. And then the last thing I want to share with you are some questions related to sustain or not to sustain. Not everything is sustainable. And it may be elements of a program, or it may be the program itself. Maybe over time a program has ran its course. So these are particular questions that I offer you in terms of, number one, does the community need the program or the service? Do the evaluation results demonstrate the program is making a difference? And your evaluation work is very critical in helping you know, what difference does it make to the recipient, the person who comes into the room? Does the community value the program? Do people want to continue to come, want to continue to participate? Do you need to sustain the entire program? And we talked about that earlier. What elements are really strong, and perhaps what elements need to fall away? And then what parts of the program are the most effective and needed? And can you coordinate funding from multiple sources to sustain your program? But these are really good questions to ask yourself about program sustainability, assuming that not everything needs to be sustained, but taking the best of what you have and moving that forward, leveraging that. And then, as I said earlier, letting the rest fall away. So your final questions and comments, anything that we can offer or answer. We'll get you the slides, we'll get you the templates. And again, know that I'm available to you on a one-on-one should you want to have a deeper conversation about this.
I'm wondering, we can think about this too. Is there anything we'd like to do as a follow-up to the exercises that you've done today, or anything we'd want to do together, or you just want to work with them individually inside your own shop? Or this other exercise, the chart that you just gave us, Sue? Anybody, we'd be open if you want us to host a conversation.
I'd be happy to. We could make it an open conversation, see where people are. And if people wanted to.
But only if that's helpful to
Yeah.
grantees. I don't want to.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just want to work in your own team on something for a while too. So
Sure.
you can let me know. That would be helpful.
But it could circle back to your evaluation. Are you asking the right questions?
That's right.
Are you using the right methodologies?
Right. Here's an idea, you guys. Your program reports are due on February 28th. So you could, hey, there's a good couple pages here already, right? But you could use this framework, the worksheet that Sue gave us for today, and or the chart that you just gave us, as a way of kind of thinking through some of the questions about this coming, not just the past year, but looking forward. We have 2 years left in this grant program. My guess is 3 years for many of us because of COVID this year. But so we've got some time, to do some more of this work.
Yeah.
I'll ask a question or comment. That's okay?
Yeah, Brenda.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Brenda, go ahead.
Yeah, no, Sue, I really appreciated what you said at the very start of this. So when we were just starting in your introduction, you said, that sustainability means different things to where people are in terms of the programs. And I think I think it might be interesting to have a conversation. Maybe it's a subgroup, for those of us who perhaps this initiative that we're doing on vocation and calling is a brand new endeavor within our institution versus, someone else, who may have a long history of working with churches in the community and a long history of these kinds of relationships. And this is another chapter. So it'd be interesting, even with all of the markers of sustainability, I would think that there's some, like you alluded to at the beginning, that you want to really emphasize when you're just getting going, but then there's others like even some of the communication with the public, well, if you're still figuring out kind of your identity and where, what you are, it may not be, it may be that you're not quite ready for a full-on sort of, public communication plans. So yeah, I'm just putting that up there. I thought it was, and I'm just even looking at those in this on my screen here. I recognize our own programs all have, we're at different stages and phases in terms of the relationship of our programs to our supporting institutions. So
it's a good point. And really, maybe there's subsets of conversations, as you're suggesting, Rhonda, within this group that would be helpful to certain cohorts. I don't know. Lisa?
I also think that having had this common conversation and having some framework together, it'll be helpful when we get the results of the survey that we're going to conduct in the spring. I think the sort of aggregate meta level conversation about what is ours to sustain across these broader institutions, churches, traditions, that will be interesting to me, especially in light of what we were just saying about all the changes we've navigated and so forth. So having common language and some agreement about why this matters, and that it's not, I think it's really important to keep hearing you say, some things don't have to be sustained. Some things, we're people of a death and resurrection cycle, right? That there's something to let go of that's also a good process. So sharing those decisions locally, but then on a larger level, I think will be really helpful.
Yeah. You're always pruning, right?
Yeah. But Kathleen, I would really love to have kind of a more in-depth conversation, just the details of what people are thinking of as we keep unfolding these grant programs. Like, what is bubbling up as sustainable, and what is it that your group has discovered that has been very meaningful for churches? I think that'd be really important for us to start learning from each other right now, because I think we're always thinking, okay, so what are the broader implications for the whole of the church, and how can this be sustainable outside institutions, where churches are able to say, that sounds really interesting. I think we need to go there. So I would love to just pick everybody's brains about what all are we discovering.
This may be obvious, but I feel like a lot of us are pointing to just basically what does sustainability mean for different types of hub institutions where this project's concerned.
Yeah.
And what will we see congregations do over time? It's pretty early to ask that of them, but still, if they've been at this a year or two, as it kind of marches along, or those of you who've had two cohorts like Regent, or, what do you see in the first cohort that maybe stuck and what didn't for the congregations? And then when you adapted, did that make a difference in the second round to make something more sticky, if I can use that metaphor? Like, I can't remember who said this, but it goes back to, did calling and vocation and meaning and purpose stick, regardless of the programmatic way that church engages this, important theological questions, this set of important theological questions? Laura.
Well, and the other part of that is that for our congregations in our first cohort, just the discussion of calling and purpose and vocation made them feel like they were better prepared for the COVID-19 lockdowns and pivoting as much as anything else. So it was nothing we did per se. And
well, you gave them that. You set the table for that.
At all.
Yeah.
Which is a little frightening, because that's kind of a thing you can't plan for. I mean, you don't really know what the impact is. It's kind of like yelling at the grocery store person is going to be in their day. So we talked about it. Okay. And I think just to Sue, that's a hard thing to evaluate too, because you don't know.
Yeah, the impact of programs could be different on different participants. So, I mean, there's all depths to this in terms of what's working and what's not working. Well, again, I want to thank you.
Wow, Sue, thanks so much. You're such a great teacher, and all your experience. We
My
all
pleasure.
learn so much. So,
Thank you.
and we're going to invite you back to teach us something more.
Well, why don't we come back together as you wish?
Okay, that'd be great.
Next level of conversation, whatever that might be.
And I really encourage everybody to work with Sue one-on-one too, if that would be helpful. So,
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's our program for today. Join us next week for a discussion of Scott Kermode's book on the Innovative Church.
And get those program reports